hydrogen as an actual PED. This is going to be really cool, guys. I'd like you to meet Dr. Tyler LeBaron. He has a PhD. He's a science guy, real scientist. He's here with us today, and his background is molecular biology, exercise physiology, and he's interested in research in hydrogen itself. So, Dr. LeBaron, thank you so much for coming on today. Let's get right into this hydrogen, the basics. Please tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for letting me join on your podcast and share this information with your audience. It's something I've been passionate about really since 2009. Researching this area. Did my PhD in this and still doing a lot of research on the therapeutic and ergogenic effects of molecular hydrogen. Ergogenic meaning performance enhancing, so thus your performance enhancing drug concept, right? And well, first, I think a lot of your audience is wondering, well, what do you mean hydrogen, right? And I mean hydrogen as in, like, when you look at your periodic table of elements, hydrogen is the number one, right? Well, that's the element hydrogen. And that hydrogen will combine with another hydrogen to form a molecule called molecular hydrogen. So this is hydrogen gas. It's a hot topic right now in the green energy. It's used for fuel. It's 3 times more energy dense than gasoline. I mean, hydrogen was the first element in existence in the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, right? It's really considered the ancestor of all the elements because a hydrogen is just a proton and electron, and then of course the molecule is 2 protons and 2 electrons. But the sun gives us so much energy. That's because of nuclear fusion. It takes the hydrogen, literally takes the hydrogen, smashes the protons together to change the nucleus to now make helium. And this is how all the elements are formed, is from hydrogen. So that just some history of our history with hydrogen. In fact, we published an interesting article recently on the historical review of hydrogen, going through all of this, and it's very fascinating when we consider that hydrogen was involved in the origins of the universe as well as the genesis of life. So about 3.8 billion years ago, in these deep sea hydrothermal vents, there was hydrogen gas being produced, and that started the genesis, right? That's the genesis of life, because hydrogen as this fuel source was then metabolized and bacteria started and so on. And so then we have the genesis of life, but it goes further. We also show that hydrogen was involved in the evolution of life, from your bacteria and your eukaryotes to the eukaryotes, for example, which is our animal and human cells. So hydrogen was involved in this entire evolutionary process. So just to summarize, the origins of the universe, the genesis of life, and the evolution of life. And then we actually have always had this symbiotic relationship with gut bacteria, right? I mean, we know the microbiome is a huge thing. Well, it turns out that the bacteria of our gut, a healthy gut, will produce hydrogen gas upon the metabolism of various fibers. So we're always exposed to hydrogen gas naturally when we have a healthy diet. But nowadays, with a SAD or a standard American diet and antibiotics and everything, the levels of natural hydrogen gas are often much lower than they used to be from our ancestors. Well, turns out that this molecule of hydrogen does have therapeutic, ergogenic, right, this performance enhancing effects to our body, and it's being researched all over the world. The research primarily started in Japan when there was an article published in Nature Medicine. Okay, that's a top science journal, Nature Medicine.
Right.
And what they found was that only 4% hydrogen gas was extremely effective at preventing the brain damage induced by a stroke. It was in a rat model. They basically cut the blood supply, and then this is going to cause, this ischemia or low oxygen. That's what a stroke is, right? And then after that, when you let the blood go back, you have this reperfusion effect where all the oxygen-rich blood goes to the brain, and that causes a lot of oxidative distress, a lot of inflammation, a lot of damage, and that really kills the brain. But 4% hydrogen gas, actually, in this study, they used 2% hydrogen gas, so even lower. This is below the flammability level. That's important because hydrogen, like I said, is explosive. But this smaller percentage of hydrogen gas basically suppressed the brain damage induced by this stroke. And that's amazing. So that means it has immediate clinical applications. And indeed, there have now been probably over 140 clinical studies so far that has outlined and illustrated the therapeutic effects of molecular hydrogen and it's been studied in about 170 different human and animal disease models. So,
but is it? But excuse me, but from an FDA standpoint, it's not an FDA drug. Like, let's talk about that from that.
Correct. Yeah, so the only thing with the FDA is it is recognized as GRAS, right? Generally recognized as safe. So it has that designation. But to get FDA approval on a natural compound or something, it's not out of this world. But typically you require a very large clinical study, something that's millions of dollars. And most of the funding that's being done on molecular hydrogen is from government grants, right? And those are only $50,000 to a few $100,000. It's not enough to do a major clinical trial that is required to receive FDA level approval, right? So it's not at that level. Who knows if it will become there? But the preliminary research in the animal studies and of course the clinical studies is very promising. And because we already established how hydrogen is already natural to our bodies, like from our gut bacteria, it has a very high safety profile. In fact, they've used hydrogen gas back in the 1940s as a diving gas, okay, to prevent decompression sickness, right? Normally we think about helium, but for some of those really deep dives, they'll use hydrogen gas. And so they've done a lot of studies at extremely high concentrations, and there's no chronic toxic effects. And so we're talking about something that has a very high safety profile and really has quite a bit of research with it. In fact, the first time that it was suggested that molecular hydrogen had therapeutic effects was in 1793. And this is from that article that I mentioned. But there was some early guys that were doing research on a whole bunch of different gases, just inhaling it and doing all sorts of things. And they stumbled across hydrogen, and they talked about how it has this remarkable ability to help eliminate inflammation, for example. So there's really some interesting research there, but the research really didn't catch on until 2007, and now there's upwards of over 2,000 publications showing these therapeutic effects of hydrogen, which one of them is this performance-enhancing substance.
Well, let's talk about this. So, for people to see it as a supplement, or how do you ingest it? Like, there's pills, there's intermuscular.
Yeah. So your methods of administration, right?
Yeah,
so there's several ways that we do this clinically. Of course, a simple way is just inhalation, right? We for example, we can use a tank of mixed gases, for example, and administer hydrogen gas via inhalation. Number of clinical studies on this. You could even take hydrogen-rich, take the gas and dissolve it into eye drop saline, and then you put that on the eyes. And we've done some studies on this as well. Dissolving it into water and taking a bath in it is another way. In fact, some of these miracle waters around the world that have claimed to have all these therapeutic properties, a lot of this is kind of ridiculous and not true. However, there are some of these waters that appear to actually have or contain small amounts of dissolved hydrogen, which could make sense from various basalt catalyzed reactions and bacteria or so on. But the most common way right now is actually you can take the gas and simply dissolve it into water, right? You bubble the gas into water, or some other methods of infusing the hydrogen gas into the water. It doesn't combine with the water. It doesn't change the pH or anything. It's just the water contains dissolved hydrogen gas, right? And then you drink it. So water ends up being the carrier. And you can do this with different beverages, for example, and you infuse the gas into the solution, and then you drink it.
This is what you get with the Anabolic Doc app. Number one, a digital history and physical exam. Number two, weekly Zoom meetings with me. Number three, discounted commercial labs. Number four, weekly member-only uncensored videos. Number five, Anabolic Doc's mailbag. You can't come to the meetings, or you don't want to come to the meetings, you ask a question, I'm going to respond to your question by making a video, put it back up on the app, and you get to see your own question. Lastly, diagnostic and management library that is easily searchable by keywords.
Like, how long after you drink it? This is the stuff everyone wants to hear. And we're going to have some future guys. I'm going to try this stuff. So, and Dr. LeBaron and I are going to see each other up at the Mr. Olympia. I'm going to be trying this stuff because I've seen the data. I've seen the real writing on the wall. And I think if it can help this much, I'll do it, right? So I'll try it on top of my ABCDs, keeping you guys strong and healthy. This is going to be cool stuff. So when you take what's the concentration? Like, tell us the dumb it down for us though.
Yeah, so the pharmacokinetics a little bit, right?
Right.
So basically, when you take the hydrogen water, you're talking about doses that range, from only 0.5 milligrams to several milligrams of hydrogen. Now that may not sound like a lot, but let's remember that hydrogen is the smallest molecule in the universe, right? It only weighs 2 grams per mole compared to, say, vitamin C, which is 176 grams per mole. So, in fact, if you do the stoichiometry here, they count the amount of molecules. There are more molecules of hydrogen in about 1 milligram of hydrogen than there are molecules of vitamin C in 100 milligrams of vitamin C. So, and I'm just saying we have to be careful when we're thinking about these low doses because the molar mass of hydrogen is so low. But when you ingest the hydrogen, then it's going to go from hydrogen water. It'll go into the stomach and it'll diffuse into the bloodstream, goes to the heart, and you actually will start to measure increases in breath hydrogen of your exhalation. So you'll measure increases in just a couple of minutes, and it peaks in about 15 or 20 minutes. So that shows that hydrogen gas is certainly diffusing through the mucosal linings of the stomach, of the intestines, entering the bloodstream, and so on. Because it's very bioavailability. And, as a doctor, of course, you know that the number one thing in all of supplements or pharmacology is the bioavailability of the substance, right? And
getting into the bloodstream. Right.
Some of the number one things that dictate the bioavailability of anything are the size of it. Well, molecular hydrogen, it's like we said, it's the smallest molecule in the universe, right? And the mass is only 2 grams per mole. Plus, it's a neutral molecule, so there's no charge. Like an ion has to go through an ion channel, for example. Even water, which is neutral, has to go through a protein channel called an aquaporin. But hydrogen just enters the cell membrane through simple diffusion. So it can reach the nucleus, the mitochondria, and other subcellular organelles without any problem. Okay, and that's when it's exerting these therapeutic effects that we're seeing in the research.
So how typically would you see this? What are the positive, like after an hour? Let's get right into the gym now.
Right.
For an endurance athlete, for a strength athlete, for just fitness guy. What are we looking at here, like from the study standpoint?
Okay, so the studies that they're very interesting. They're kind of all over the place. There was a systemic review and meta-analysis recently published in Pharmaceuticals, which is a journal I'm a guest editor of. But in the journal, they did conclude that the clinical studies indicate that drinking hydrogen water does appear to have this ergogenic effect in terms of its anti-fatigue effect and helping with like endurance of things. So your question talking more about what are the acute, a lot of the immediate effects of hydrogen after you ingest it versus say the chronic effects, and they're both. And so let's talk about some of those acute effects first, right? So when you take just pure molecular hydrogen, you might notice, for example, in the gym, that your ability to do another bout of exercise or another set, for example, or be able to go to, or your ability to exercise longer is going to increase. In fact, they did a study in elite soccer players. It was a small study, 10 athletes, but they were doing these isometric maximal exertions of these knee extension exercises, and they found that the drinking of hydrogen water allowed them to perform better. They were not as susceptible to fatigue, right? And they also measured the lactate levels, or lactic acid as people call, and those levels were decreased as well. So we see that hydrogen is directly helping, in the mitochondria, for example, for energy production. So people can have this additional ability to exercise better and improve their workout performance. For like other endurance type exercise in terms of like your cardiorespiratory fitness, your heart rate, you might notice that you can do the same amount of work with less exertion. Both actual physiologically, we can see this through measuring various submaximal indices of the exercise intensity, as well as your perceived exertion. Okay, hydrogen has this effect also on the mind in these placebo-controlled studies where those on the hydrogen had a decreased rate of perceived exertion, as indicated by the Borg's RPE scale, for example. So in this way, people can, when they take the hydrogen water, they're going to notice They can exercise longer. It's not as difficult, and they don't get as sore, for example. And then there's some more studies coming out in terms of the actual performance enhancing effects. That and those ones probably are going to come more over chronically, so over a longer period of time, because the hydrogen itself is directly benefiting your ability to train, and the better you can train, then the better your adaptations are going to be later on, right? That's why you want to have fast recovery.
I'm just wondering, why is there not more research on this? What's going on with this?
Well, yeah, again, it's all subjective, right? I mean, it depends on your matter of perspective, because in reality is hydrogen only got popular around 2007. And popular by, I mean, being published in Nature Medicine. Okay, but now there's over 2,000 articles. That's like an exponential growth. Okay, look at something that we should also talk about, nitric oxide, but that was discovered back in the late 1970s or so. It took forever before it won a Nobel Prize in 1998, and then it's only now that people are really getting behind, like, wow, nitric oxide is really good for us. Let's do something about it, right? So the research on hydrogen is actually growing at quite a rapid rate, and by universities all over the world. And again, this is not funded by some pharmaceutical company or just the industry or something. This is government grants, research universities. This is where we're getting the money from, and these funds aren't that big, and so we're not able to do massive studies. And you can't patent hydrogen. It's a natural molecule, right?
Thank God.
Right. Yes. I mean, you can patent certain ways to deliver it and things, but it's a little bit complicated in terms of like a pharmaceutical company getting behind this.
It's really cool, and I could see what you just explained with nitric oxide, that this is just like anything else. It's a curve. Like, Ozempic semaglutide, it's been out there for a long time, and why did it just kick in a year or two ago? I mean, it's the nature of the market. It's the market forces, right? It's just the moons line up. So that's really cool. So we got through that, and the nitric oxide effects I did want to ask you about. Tell us more about the relation to endothelial. That's the interwrapping of the artery. That's all I'm about, guys. A1C, blood pressure, cholesterol. For guys on steroids and testosterone, want to keep us functional forever, long as we can. You got to know the ABCDs. How do you see this molecular hydrogen working with blood pressure, endothelial, blood clotting, hypercoagulable, heart attacks? Let's go.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot that we can talk about. In fact, the Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare just approved hydrogen therapy a couple of years ago as an advanced medicine, Class B medicine, for the treatment of post-cardiac arrest syndrome. So they can do some really large clinical studies. It's not approved like FDA level approved, but approved so they can do these major clinical studies in a hospital. There's several hundred patients that's being evaluated, and the preliminary results are looking positive, as my colleagues have told me. So there's a lot that in that whole area, and so the benefits of hydrogen, like for the heart, like your ejection fraction, the way the ventricles are working, their microvasculature. You talked about eNOS, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, for example, so that you can regulate your blood pressure. This is actually a very important topic, because nitric oxide, of course, is extremely important and helps with that vasodilation. But there's different forms of these enzymes, right? There's iNOS and eNOS and nNOS, right? And eNOS, of course, is what we want. But these other isoforms of the enzyme, when they get hyperactivated by trauma or by disease or by a lot of different things that can hyperactivate it, infection, for example, then you get the dark side of nitric oxide. Okay, nitric oxide is a free radical. By definition, it's a free radical. So that's going to be very problematic because that can, of course, cause lots of damage. In fact, nitric oxide, when the levels get too high for whatever condition, that nitric oxide will react spontaneously, instantaneously with superoxide radical, which is problem. But when it does that, it forms peroxynitrite, which is the most pernicious species, oxidative molecule that there is. It's very damaging for the body. Well, molecular hydrogen does several things to really help this. Number one, it helps to suppress the excessive activation of iNOS and nNOS, so you don't get these hyper excessive levels of nitric oxide. Okay, nitric oxide regulation is only healthy when it's at the right location, it's regulated correctly, right, and the concentration is correct. And hydrogen is able to do these things. We have many studies showing this crosstalk between nitric oxide signaling and hydrogen gas signaling, right? They're both gases, right? They could be called gasotransmitters. Well, technically, hydrogen is not a gasotransmitter, but that's a different technical aspect. Okay, now with the other thing with a hydrogen gas that we mentioned is the ability to reduce oxidative stress. Well, one of the things that can help to reduce is this peroxynitrite molecule, all right? But hydrogen is what is known as a selective antioxidant. Okay, it's selective because it only goes after the bad free radicals, the ones that are most damaging, that are most oxidizing. Okay, that's like the hydroxyl radical or peroxynitrite, and it can reduce those levels. But hydrogen gas does not have the reductive capacity to reduce your beneficial radicals such as nitric oxide. Okay, when you train in the gym and when you do your exercise, you are producing more free radicals. You're producing superoxide, hydrogen peroxide, right? You're doing all of these things. And yes, if it's excessive, just like an excessive amount of training or whatever it is, smoking, for example, that's problematic. But those free radicals are crucial for your body to get stronger. Those are the adaptations that cause your body to adapt. Okay. Wow. So you don't want to blunt, you don't want to neutralize or negate those critical free radicals and reactive oxygen species. Hydrogen gas doesn't do that. It does not perturb normal redox cellular homeostasis. But it can go after the toxic radicals or oxidants that do nothing but harm us, such as hydroxyl radical and peroxynitrite.
Right. I just want to keep it a little bit limited because if I'm getting lost in the chemistry, it's just going to be ugly and I'm not a chemist, but honestly, I deal with it, right, clinically. So, I'm thinking everything's a balancing act, in life. And here I am, you're kind of making me nervous because I'm on drugs to increase nitric oxide. I take nebivolol, nitric oxide doning beta blocker for blood pressure, endothelial for sex. I take tadalafil, which is a PED5 inhibitor, which directly works on nitric oxide in the corpus cavernosum of the endothelium of the penis. It also works in the heart, in the vasculature. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm doing pretty well, but maybe it's going to hurt me because I knew that. Like, there's a point where too much nitric oxide, anything too much, can go beyond and cause the damage. So it seems like I could see the future of utilizing hydrogen, it's molecular hydrogen, sustainably in different delivery systems in the body and it's such a ubiquitous and natural universal phenomenon to modulate our system. This is anti-aging, guys. This is real anti-aging, and I think I'm gonna cut us off here and say I gotta try the stuff myself. We gotta put you back in the lab. Gotta get you back in the lab, and then we're gonna try this. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna learn more, and then we're gonna talk about some of the commercial availabilities that I'm going to be interested in as we move forward, understanding hydrogen as a PED and as an anti-aging true modality. But it's not bullshit, guys. Just have to understand the science. And again, it's not going to be some amazing, that would be great, right? When you're reperfusion injury and strokes, that's amazing. That's going to be in hospitals where they're delivering it with concentrations. It's probably very dangerous, from explosions to everything else. But from human beings, if I'm having my pre-workout or my during or my post-workout, and I want this much more of just making sure that I'm killing it, I'm going to be doing so. I'm going to be looking into that. That's how I do it. That's on top of everything else with diet, exercise, meditation, and medicines. And this is kind of like this bridge now where we're entering into this incredible field using technology and real science. Dr. LeBaron,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
it works perfect what you said. Just to end on that note, is hydrogen really helps as a modulating molecule to bring things back to homeostasis.
Right.
That's what it's key at. It's not a drug that's going to push you out. It's going to bring you back to homeostasis. And people, if they're interested, they can look more at my organization, my nonprofit, molecularhydrogeninstitute.org. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We have a lot of research there, a lot of education there you can learn on. We don't promote or endorse any products, but we are focused on the education. I will say that there are some products that are not good out there, so be careful. I know you're going to try some new hydrogen products coming up. I'm interested to hear your experience. We're at Mr. Olympia, and we'll talk more about that and some of the research that we have done on some of those specific products that you're going to try.
It's such a pleasure having you, Doctor. It's so cool, and we're such on the cutting edge, bleeding edge, but it's real science, and it's really incredible to learn. So I'll definitely see you at the Mr. Olympia. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.